Welcome to Faith Factor, a program with real people dealing with real life issues in a real world and seeing where faith is a factor in their overcoming and in their victory. Have you ever felt like a prodigal, or are you a prodigal? In the story that is told in Luke chapter 15, one of the things that you notice is that the prodigal became involved in a lot of very unsavory things. And if you would pull that story into a contemporary context, you would think of booze and women, drugs. Well, it is very interesting to see that regardless of whether it was 100 or 1,000 years ago or today, the Father's response is still the same. Listen to it. In Luke 15, verse 20 says, when he saw his son, his raggedy, probably AIDS-stricken son, coming to him in the distance, the son arose and came to his father. And when he was still a great distance away, the father saw him, had compassion, and this old man ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And then here's the young man saying, Father, I don't deserve your attention. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But what does the father say? He said to his servants, come on, bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and bring the fatted calf here and kill it. For this is my son. He was dead and is alive again. He was lost and be found. And they began to make merry. Heaven celebrates when a prodigal comes home. Heaven celebrates when we break the bonds of any kind of addiction, and we can always praise God for that. You know, it is not unusual when we stray away from God that we try to find solutions and we try to find satisfaction in any number of addictions. For some it's drugs, for some it's sex, for some it's work, for some it's religion. It's all sorts of things to try to make ourselves feel good. And then sometimes those addictions become a bond, become a chain. It's so difficult to break away from them. But our guest on this program is Larry McLucas. He's a man who's been there, who's done that, and whom God has reclaimed as a prodigal. Welcome to Faith Factor, Larry. So good to have you.
Good to be here.
Well, you weren't always a nice guy, were you?
No.
Okay.
I wasn't.
You know, bad boys don't begin bad from the mother's womb. So let's talk about the roots now. Tell me about your early days and your growing up so we'd have some perspective in terms of what shaped you.
Well, like many folks, I came from a broken home. My parents got separated when I was an infant, divorced when I was 2, and I was angry. And as far as I can remember,
Angry
I've
as
always
a
been
little boy
angry.
even, huh?
Oh, yeah. When I was 2 years old, a lady saw me walking down the street, and she spoke with me, and she said, he's very angry. She called my grandmother, whom I was staying with at the time, and I asked him where he was going. He said, I'm going home, because I didn't want to make this change. And I've just, all my life, I was angry. And as things went on, my father was married and divorced several times.
And who did you live with as a child? Were you bounced back and forth?
Well, no, we lived with my grandmother and my father for 3 years. He lived at home with his parents for 3 years because he was not married, and my grandmother and grandfather basically took care of us during that time. And then he remarried, and so we were with my father. Circumstances surrounding all that basically are just that they got married too young, and things happen as they often do, and things didn't work out. But it was rough for us.
Were you close to your father?
Yes, I was. I was and I wasn't. It's hard, you know, I idolized my father as a child.
But you weren't really intimately connected with him?
No, because it seems like he was gone all the time. I don't know if he actually was, but in my memory, he wasn't around much. He was always working or doing something, so I was closer to my grandmother and grandfather than I was to my father. And then when we lived in a city until I was...
What city?
In Framingham, Massachusetts. And at that point, and we went to New Hampshire And when I was 6, almost 7 years old, we moved to New Hampshire. And when I was 6 years old, I started to get into things. They would have parties and they would have drinks there, and you know, there's exotic drinks that tasted, you know, like fruit punch and such. So I was sampling those when they weren't in the room. And I would drink those.
You would, you were drinking at 6 years of age.
And my father challenged me. Yes, he challenged me. To me, it was a challenge. He was trying to quit smoking. He was having a nicotine fit, and he said, "If I ever catch you smoking," he said, "I'll kill you." Well, to me, that was a challenge. So I immediately proceeded to get into smoking.
Now, who would sell you cigarettes at 6?
Well, I used to buy cigarettes for my father and for his wife and for somebody else at a drugstore, and you know, you have to bring a note, and half the time I would lose the note. So I would tell the guy.
Intentionally?
No, I'd be playing along the route, you know, and just lose it. And so I'd ask the guy, he'd send me home. Well, I didn't want to go home all the time, so I asked him, "Would you mind just calling him, you know, so I don't have to go home?" So he did, and you know, after doing it many times, because there were a lot of interesting things for a young boy to get into on the way, and I would always lose the notes, or most always. After a period of time, he just quit calling. And I would forget whom I was buying the cigarette, or what kind of cigarettes, and he'd say, "Who you buying them for?" So, you know, I would just tell him the name, and he'd give me the right brand, and I'd bring it home. So when I went there, it was, you know, not unusual for me to have change in my hand and not know who, and just, I mean, not know what brand and say who, and he'd give me a pack of cigarettes. And I took him home, climbed up an apple tree, and I took a drag on it and fell out of the tree because I got dizzy. But the challenge was there, and I had to stick with that challenge.
So at what age did you actively begin smoking?
Well, by the time I was 12, actually I started smoking pretty good then. You know, it was hard to get cigarettes all the time, so I would take the butts of cigarettes and get what was left in it and put it in a pipe and smoke it.
Oh, for goodness sakes.
And then by the time I was 12, I was smoking about half, 3/4 of a pack a day.
12 years old?
Yeah. And by that time, I was also drinking quite a bit. And also getting into bad habits, running with the wrong people. I would go to visit back in the city. We moved into the country, and I would visit back in the city, and there were gangs there. My first gang I joined, I was 6 years old also. A lot of things happened when I was 6 years old.
My
yeah,
word.
I was the gopher, you know, go for all the different things. And
run the errands for the guy.
Yeah. And if you needed to get into a window nobody else could fit, well, I was just a little tiny guy, so I could go in.
Put you through so you can help facilitate the break-in at 6.
Or to distract the guard at a parking lot so they could get into the cars to steal things out of the cars, things like that.
You were handy.
And
so you were a rebel from the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't like authority. I figured the only person in this world that had any authority over me was my father. Nobody else had the right. And that's the way it all started.
What about schooling, Larry? I mean, you know, 6, you're helping to do break-ins, you're into drugs, you're into to alcohol, you know, before you could barely walk.
Actually,
I mean, what about school? Go ahead.
I was a straight A student, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade.
Amazing.
And then I went to a country school where in the 3rd grade we'd already done things in the 2nd grade. So I got bored, and we had 3 grades in one class, so I would do 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. And there was a teacher there that wanted to advance me, and it didn't work out. Had a little problem with the principal. We had problems.
Got thrown out?
Well, I beat up her son a couple times, and so we didn't have a very good relationship. And so
it's not funny,
yeah.
But I mean, it's ridiculous, it's sad, it's not funny, but one has to chuckle.
Well, and also my sister, my older sister, had a run-in with her, and my dad went to defend her. My sister was in the right, and my dad went to defend her, and he did it in a very volatile way. And so our families weren't on the best of terms. And so that ended, and I got bored then. So that's when I started to become the class clown, and started to do things that just to keep my interest going, you know, to do something. And that's when I started getting into more mischief, and like I said,
into getting more involved with gangs and whatnot.
Well, in that town there weren't gangs, but there were some mischievous kids that wanted to do things. So we'd go out. I would hitchhike. I would sneak out and hitchhike down to this town called Pennacook. Slipped my mind there. Pennacook.
So now, when did you move out of that environment? So you move into your teenage years. Now what? Did it get better or did it get worse?
It got worse because I was bored and more angry. And by the time I was...
Angry at whom?
The world. By the time I was a teenager...
Did you hate yourself?
Oh yeah. I thought that I was
Trash.
no good, you know. I thought I would never amount to anything. One of my father's wives, used to tell me I was just like him all the time, and that he was never amount to anything, and I would never amount to anything. Well, in my eyes, my dad was a great person, you know, but I just had no confidence. And with my dad, he would tell me to do things, and he would tell other people how great I did things, but to me he would always say, well, you did that, but you should have done this and this. So I thought...
So you never felt adequate?
Yeah, I can't please him, so I can't please anybody, so, you know.
So the teenage years now?
Well, I got into more heavily drinking and doing, running with the wilder crowds. I don't know how to say the things I was doing politely, because it's not for mixed company that I would say it now, the things that I was involved with.
Women, sex, drugs.
Yeah. Well, the drugs weren't there. It was the alcohol and the wild girls and, and the wild way of doing things.
Now, did you have any kind of spiritual roots at all? Nothing? Nothing at all?
When I was 4, 5, and 6, my grandfather had studied the Bible, and I guess he actually became a Seventh-day Adventist.
Huh.
And he saw that we went to church for those 3 years. And I don't remember the doctrine, but in 1956 I was presented this little Bible, and it had my name on the front. And I carried that Bible with me all through the years. But that left an impression in my mind. It was the love. I was accepted. Today, I was a kid who could never sit still. Today they would have me on medication. But this Sabbath school teacher, who was also the pastor's wife, was very loving and very patient with me. And that's what I remembered. I remembered the love in the church. I didn't remember the doctrine, but I remembered the love in the church. So
even though you were wild, you just had this one little blue sky spot in a very dark life.
I had that connection. Okay. In our outside of those 3 years, we had no religion in the home. We had no, God wasn't in the home. And but I had this Bible,
and you kept it with you all along. Now, one of the things I'm going to want to get into is, so your teenage years, were you in school, or were you just wild during your teenage years?
I was in school until I was 17. I got kicked out of school several times for drinking, for fighting, and a few different other things. But when I was 17, 3/4 of the way through my junior year, I quit. They told me I had to do something I didn't want to do. And so
you walked out of school?
Yeah.
And then what did you do?
I started working. I worked in a woolen mill nights, which allowed me the days to frolic and do the things I wanted to do. Summertime, go to the beach and things like that. And then I went into the service. My father was moving out of the state. He was going south to Kentucky. I didn't want to go, so in those days you had to be 21 to be on your own, and I was only 17, so my dad and I weren't getting along then. Some things happened.
How did you get into the service then if you were 17?
He signed for me.
He signed you away. How did you feel?
I felt like when he did that, see, I didn't want to go in the service. I wanted to stay by myself. And I was working full time. I figured I could take care of myself. Had been doing it a long time. At that point in time, he was working as a bouncer in the bar. And we didn't see much of each other anyway. But he wouldn't let me do that. So I felt that it was his fault that I couldn't do this. I didn't understand the way the law worked. And I wanted to stay there. He wanted to go to Kentucky. So he said, well, you can go in the service.
So he, in essence, he forced you into the service.
That's the way I felt.
And you felt betrayed.
Yeah, and let down again.
Okay. Well, hold that thought for a moment. A young man seeking love, seeking acceptance and not finding it except in the wrong places. But all prodigals seek acceptance, and they can only find it eventually in a connection with God. We're going to follow the story of Larry McLucas, from a wild guy who began drinking and binging at age 6 to someone who eventually begins to discover the Father that he never knew existed, and what a difference it has made in his life. It's going to be a surprise to see where he ends up finally.
If you have been inspired by the incredible stories of faith in this series, then we have good news for you. Now you can own your very own copy of each of these 13 episodes in the first season on DVD or video cassette. This is a series you'll treasure, and it makes a great gift too. This 13-part series with Cynthia Prime makes a wonderful gift for a friend or family member. Just call us at 1-800-752-3226 during regular business hours, and we'll be happy to take your order. You may also order it online at www.3abn.org.
Now we're talking with Larry McLucas, and we're at the point, Larry, where you're still pretty much a wild guy, and your father, in essence, conscripts you into the military. And where do they send you?
Well, I wound up going to Vietnam.
To Vietnam. Okay.
I went into service. They were going to stick me at Fort Rucker, Alabama, and it was very hard to do what I wanted to do, my way of life there. There was nothing for a boy 17 years old, a young man 17 years old to do there. Without, I couldn't get away with what I wanted to do there. And so I decided that, I'd go to Vietnam. It was
you
my
volunteered
choice.
to go to
Yes,
Vietnam?
I volunteered.
Okay, what was it like over there?
It was nothing like I expected. It was hard to deal with. It was hard to see the poverty. But when I saw that, I realized, wow, my life wasn't so bad. Look at these kids. I see kids that were in the garbage that would pick out wormy heads of lettuce that we had just thrown away. And they'd be ready to kill to keep it. I'd see them walking around with socks that were more holes than there were socks. And I get a little emotional thinking about it.
That's okay. You saw a lot of pain and hurt, and it resonated with you, didn't it, Larry?
Yeah.
I mean, their hurt, you probably began to see your own pain in their hurt, didn't you?
Not really at that time. I've always had a feeling for kids.
Yeah.
And it really hurt me to see them hurting.
Like that.
And there were things, the way of life there, the things that we were told to do, I didn't understand. I was a machine gunner on a helicopter when I got there, and
did you kill people?
It's that's a part I don't really like to even think about. It's just, it changes you, and that's when I started really getting heavy into drinking. I mean, I was a heavy drinker when I got there, and then I started getting into the drugs. I started getting into the opium.
So you were mainlining, or?
No, I hate needles, so I never got into that, thank God. I would snort, cocaine. I did heroin one time, but only one time. I decided at that point that when I was doing it, I was flying. I was manning a machine gun in a helicopter, and at 5,000 feet, I decided I'm going to jump out and I'm going to end this war. I'm going to take care of the whole North Vietnamese army here, and I really thought that I could do it. And it took the guys about 20 minutes talking to me to keep me.
So you realized that you could lose your life very easily in one of those hallucinogenic experiences.
with the heroin, but it's like, wow, I'm never going to do that again, because I really thought that I was going to be able to safely jump out of this helicopter with no parachute or anything and take care of this whole thing.
I think Satan had a little plan there. So how many years did you spend in Vietnam?
I was there for about 13 months, then I came home and I went back again for 7 or 8 months.
And then life after the military, what was it like?
It was pretty hard. I went from Vietnam to Germany, and I got more into different drugs. It was easier to be stoned, to be drunk, than it was to try and deal with everything in life.
Was it because life was too painful to think about?
Painful, not pleasant. Just I didn't want to think about it, And when you're drunk and stoned, you don't think. And so that was the best way to stay.
Isn't that why people take refuge, to get away from themselves, to get away from the problems?
And then when I got out of the service, I had a hard time. Now, one thing that I was, what do they call it, a functioning drunk, addict. I hate to use those terms, but a lot of people didn't know. I don't think my family had any inclination, except for when I got kicked out of school, and
you were a closet
they told
abuser.
my father, yeah. They told my father that I was for drinking alcohol. I was drinking straight whiskey in school there at that time. And so when I came out, I did a pretty good job of hiding it for a little while, but then things started to catch up, and then people started telling me I needed to go and get help. I needed to go.
Did you?
No.
Okay. So did you run more gangs, or what did you do?
Well, I started to run with motorcycle gangs. I love motorcycle.
Which ones?
Been riding. First ones I partied with was Hell's Angels. And there was another group that were as bad or worse, actually, than them. I can't even recall the name of them right now.
Were they violent?
Yes. That's why I didn't actually join them. I liked the partying, I liked the wild times, but I didn't like hurting people.
And they hurt people.
Yeah, I didn't like doing that on purpose. If they came after me, that was one thing. I was ready to stand up and fight if they came after me, but I didn't want to go and hurt them.
Did you ever, I mean, with the wild kind of life that you live, Larry, did you ever almost get yourself to the point of death and God saved you? I mean, did he communicate with you by trying to rescue you in some way?
Well, I came close to dying several ways, several different times. In Vietnam I did, and the violence in that lifestyle, I came close to getting killed a few times. But God was there because maybe I didn't...
Were you aware that he was there?
Not at that point. I knew there was something happening. I knew there was something different about me and the lifestyle. You know, there was something there.
Something was tugging at you and you weren't uncomfortable. It's like the prodigal eating the swine's refuse and thinking, no, this is not good enough. At what point in time, Larry, did this lifestyle get to be so hard on you that you wanted a change somehow?
Actually, I think I was probably in my 30s before I had thought about it. But it wasn't until my 30s that I got to that point where I was sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Did you ever become suicidal, or did you ever want to die?
Yeah, well, that jumps back when I was 17, in summer of '68, I guess, just before I went into service. I thought about crashing my car. I got it up over 100 miles an hour, going through this S-curve, and I thought, well, you know, it would kill my grandmother if I did this.
And so that held you back.
Yeah. You know, like most people who want to commit suicide, you really don't want to die, you just don't want to live.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. Oh,
you don't know of a better way.
That's deep, that's deep. Now, when did you begin to feel that tug that began pushing you to look, to begin finding God, and how did you do so?
Well, I went down, I was on my way out to Arizona. I felt like where I lived, it was the environment that was bad, so I had to move and things would be better. And so I went out to Arizona, and on the way I stopped down. My dad was in Kentucky, and I stopped down and had a visit with him. And he had become an Adventist. He had remarried again, and they had a daughter, and he said, this time God's going to be in the home. And the change in him got me to thinking. And he started studying with me. We had Kenneth Cox tapes that he was showing me, and there was another evangelist that had a Revelation seminar going on, and we went to see that. And so it started working on my mind. And the first thing that worked on my mind was keeping the Sabbath. So when I got done helping him, the Lord worked things out. I was only going to be there a couple days, and he was building a barn, having a hard time, so I stayed to help him build the barn. And we did a whole lot of studying.
Had a chance to fellowship and share.
And see the difference in him.
Did you feel, was that the time you felt closest to your dad?
Yeah, well actually, the closest I felt was back just before I went to Vietnam. My grandfather died. And that was the bond that brought us back. We had severed. In my mind, we were done. And then I saw my father cry. I saw him go through emotions that I didn't think that he was capable of at this point anymore.
And you realized he had a heart.
And I realized that he did the best he could, you know, for all of us.
Yes.
And that he didn't not like me, that he loved me.
Yes. Did he say so to you?
No, not at that time.
He didn't.
This is not something, we didn't speak about love and those kind of things in our family. It wasn't until afterwards, when I became a Christian, one of the first things I realized was the importance of family.
Yes.
And how it's not unmanly to say, I love you.
Yeah. Was your father eventually able to tell you, validate you and tell you, Larry, I really love you? Was he able to?
Years later,
God did that.
Yeah.
So now here you are beginning to study with Kenneth Cox. Did it lead you into baptism, or what happened at that time?
Well, I went out to Arizona, but it was on my mind. And I got in trouble out there. And
bad habits follow you, don't they?
Yeah, and it was the drinking and the drugs that got me into the fix, and so I made a deal with the state. I would leave the state. They wouldn't put me in their hotel jail with bars.
Yeah.
And so, but I had to have a place to go, and so my dad needed help, so I went back down to Kentucky to work with him. And that's when things really started changing. We were working, putting pipe under the ground for extension for telephone and stuff, and we ran into some ledge, solid ledge. This thing's not going to go through. So after the third attempt, my dad said, you know what, we need to stop and pray. I said, Dad, we're on a public road here. And he said,
on the highway?
Yeah, right on the highway. And he says, yeah, and I said, people will see us.
Embarrassing.
Yeah, very. And so we kneel down to pray, and I keep looking up, hoping nobody's coming by.
An ex-Hell's Angel type thinking, pray in the middle of a highway.
So
not good.
We got done, we got down, and we're putting the pipe through, and when it hit, boom, solid. And so I turned and I said, see, I told you. He said, no, just wait a second. He pulled it back through, back out a little bit and put it in, and the thing went through just like it was going through hot butter. And it's like, uh-oh, you know, what happened
That let
here?
you know that there was someone there. Was that a defining moment for you?
Very
when
much
you
so.
realized that
Yeah.
God is real. God is real.
I had always prayed all my life. Didn't know why. Didn't know where it was going. Didn't know even really who I was talking to. But I always prayed. I mean, I prayed to God, but I wasn't really sure if he was there. But now I was seeing what prayer could do. And so I started paying attention to that.
It was like discovering, you know, in the parable of the prodigal son, it was like discovering that the Father was really real, not a figment of your imagination,
Yeah.
and that he does things for people. When did you know, briefly, that God loves you? When did you make that connection with that Father?
When I, two things really, he took away smoking, and one night he took away the drugs and the alcohol in a bar several years later. And then there were several, that made me realize that I didn't have the mind to do what I needed to do. I needed him in my mind. But the physical thing, I had a lot of accidents, and that's what it took for him to get me flat on my back.
Disabled you.
And disabled me, but that brought me to connection, so I came to 3ABN, and I was able to now do what I really wanted to do.
3ABN.
Work with people and work with the Lord.
So you're at 3ABN now, working for the Lord. Are you happy, finally?
I am. I have a great group of people to work with here. It's fantastic. You know.
Praise the Lord. Do you feel that the prodigal has finally come home?
Yes, ma'am.
Praise God. I could give you a hug, Larry. Thank you so much. I tell you, it is heartwarming to see God work. A child, a troubled child, a rebellious teenager, a man who has lived his life in dissipation, and now he beams. He goes all over the country working, using his skills to the glory of God. There's no limit to what God can do. And even as he did in the scripture, where he got the attention of the prodigal at his point of need, in the refuse, having nothing left, he turned to God, and the Father ran towards him and welcomed him. The Father waits anxiously, eagerly, so that if you're a prodigal, if you're stuck with addictions, know that the Father is waiting for you two to come home. Now, if you have strayed away from God, He's calling you back right now. And when you respond, what He does, He wants you to die to the old life. He facilitates that. He enables that to happen in your life. And a new person is born through baptism and through a confession of faith. But here's what Romans says. In Romans 6:6, it says, knowing this, that our old man was crucified with him, that the body of sin might be done away with, that we should no longer be slaves of sin. It says he frees us from the slavery of sin. For he who has died has been freed from sin. Now, if we died with Christ, we believe that we shall also live with him. When we die to the old life, we are born into a new life. We get back from the refuse into the Father's house.